And we are here to take questions, so please do not be shy. And whether you have comments or questions, we like to have your ideas. Please.
Thank you everyone for your presentation. Some amazing work, and it's really great to be able to access the process that I know has been developing over the past couple of years or so. I just have a question around the term expert, and perhaps we see ourselves as members of ISAM as experts, but there's another group which is people with lived experience. Is there scoping to start including that bit of expertise so that we have more of a sort of co-design approach to it?
That's a really good question. Right now, the structure of the ISAM Global Expert Network is designed initially based on frontiers in addiction medicine clinical practice. So those who are actually seeing patients, and they are in the first line of interacting with patients. So that is the initial design based on the nature of ISAM, right? I mean, in ISAM, we are a group of physicians who are working in the field of addiction. So that is the initial design. Then we extended that to addiction medicine, addiction psychiatry societies. And now we are thinking to extend that to addiction treatment centers. So if Dr. Norouzi here has a center in Kabul and they have 100 patients in their center, they can be one of the members of that network. And then I can ask Dr. Norouzi, how many of your patients have this specific issue? And they can report about the status of that specific problem in their center. So that is the third level. But the fourth level, as you said, I mean, we can think about, and there are already some expert networks with people with living experiences with the drug use. We need to think about that. And you are one of the ISAM board members, so we need to think how we can make sure that their voices are going to be heard and how we can engage them in the community. And honestly, I do not think that, at least in this meeting, we had any of them involved and giving us feedbacks. This is what we are already doing. I mean, in ASAM meeting in the US, in CPD meeting, we invite them as a part of the community. But ISAM needs to think about whether we want to kind of engage them in that community. Any other suggestions from the colleagues in the panel? What is your experience? Can you just help us with that? This is kind of...
Hello? Yes, I think one thing to keep in mind is that this is initiated on a shoestring, I think. And so you need to work with people who are quite responsive and who are willing to kind of like just get involved. And I think when you do this with groups which are not, for example, so attached to a system and with a very different background, then it becomes much harder to build something like this in a time. Obviously, this is a goal, but I think just what already has been achieved so far is immense in that short time, and I think that would take a lot more work.
Joe.
Thank you. I think there may be a case for having a discussion within ISAM-GEN about whether to have a specific survey in the future on how do the ISAM-GEN members and societies engage with civil society? How do they involve patients? I can see why people with lived experience aren't experts in the definition of ISAM-GEN, because that's a specific group of people with specific skills. But we should be surveying members on how they engage with civil society, individuals, families and societies.
Susan, do you have any suggestions yourself? Yes, please.
I was just going to add one thing, which is that I think as ISAM-GEN kind of grows and more groups are developing on whatever specific areas, I would recommend, in response to your great point, that the expert group include individuals with lived experience that are informing and what we call co-producing, involved in the vetting of the surveys and the determining of the questions that are being asked. And and there are a lot of individuals with lived experience who also work in addiction communities, and so to include them as stakeholders in the process would be one way of doing it. And I think they will be very excited to be engaged and involved.
Absolutely. Arash, you have anything? Yeah, and the process of co-development is, something that the posters that I was showing you, everything that we develop, or even when we want to start a brain stimulation study, we usually invite people from the community and ask them, does it look good? What is your thoughts about that? So without the co-development process, even when you talk about advanced technologies, it's going to be very complex to make sure that we are able to use that in the community in the future. Arash, please.
So just a quick comment that the good news is that we're moving towards developing the ISAM portal, in which we are hoping that we can engage people in different subgroups. And right now, the process flowchart that Ahmed showed in his initial slides shows that we did recruit experts with snowball sampling. At the first, we had some databases, we reached out, we had a list of criteria, which is mentioned in the ISAM-GEN protocol paper. You can refer to that for more details. But hopefully the good news is that we will be able to have other subgroups which will contain different experts in different fields in addiction.
Thank you for all the responses. So how about I propose this, Hamed? So I'll lead one that would involve co-production, and I'd like a co-chair, please.
Absolutely, yep. You're assigned right now, just very fast process. And thank you very much, Susanna, for volunteering, helping us with that process. Dave, please.
Dr. Akhtiari, I think I'd like to start out by acknowledging that I was publicly shamed for not filling out my survey that was sent to me, and I tried to capture the QR code, but the slides went too quickly. So if you put it back on the screen at some point, I will fill out my survey. My question is a simple one. It's I wondered about validation. I know it's an enormous task, but these surveys, they rely on the way the wording is in some of them on people filling out the survey reflecting on a jurisdiction. For me, when I filled out this first survey in the series, I was mindful that for a lot of the questions, my answer was, well, it depends. And how do I decide, this is a black and white answer you're looking for, it's not a Likert scale. But I also wondered, do I really know? And if a researcher did a Google search, is this available in Canada? It might come up with a very different reflection. Is there a process of validation built into these surveys?
That is a really, really good question, and I think that is going to be an ongoing process. I'm not sure, have you done the simple self-reports that we use in everyday clinical practice? Like PHQ-9, BEC. When you do even those well-validated surveys, sometimes when you want to go through them, sometimes you feel, okay, it depends. Even when you are reporting about yourself and you have a full knowledge about yourself, some of those surveys you feel, okay, it depends maybe sometimes. So that is the nature of self-report, first of all. Second, we are asking about people's perception about what is actually happening. So that is one of the other kind of essences in those surveys. We are asking clinicians about what they perceive as what is actually happening. So there is always a filter of their perception about the reality, and this is not the actual reality. We believe that even those perceptions would be valuable, but we need to always kind of consider that. Sometimes when we run surveys in some African countries that we know, or some other countries that we know that they do not have that much, but there are people who are really positive. And they report, okay, I mean, we have something and there are things, but I mean, there are some European countries that we know that they are sometimes more negative in terms of, okay, no, the system is not that good. And so you see that that level of perception is always involved. So we always take those things with a grain of salt in terms of we know that we are talking about the perception of what you perceive. But even with those filters, we feel that the data is still valuable. So you can have a sense about what is actually happening while you feel that there is always a limitation in that process. Any other suggestions from the panel members? And the other thing is, for right now, the surveys that we showed are being organized or being kind of asked from the societies. But now we are also moving towards running those surveys in the expert networks. And for example, from Canada, we have 30, 40 experts. So sometimes when you ask from a large group of experts and then you put them together in a collective way, then it might be a better reflection of the reality. And when you basically put them together and you have a sort of a collective data, that might be potentially a better representation.
I have a reflection, but I'd like to hear from what Christian.
Christian, please.
Okay. I had the same concerns as you had when I started out. So the first step, what I did is I really tried to screen and ask around if there's anything I can base it on, I can use, if there's anything similar available, which was not the case. I asked, I have, for example, Linda from the European, what is it called now, Drug Use Agency, who does a lot of these international surveys, and she also said there's nothing available. So then I did kind of like come up with the questions. But we had a number of iterations and people from different countries. I had the list of people, it was from each continent, we had representation, did go through the questionnaire and came back with comments. I know that this is kind of like a pretty much a crude process, but I think in principle, one thing again is that we are trying to get started and trying to get going, and one thing, perfect is always the enemy of good, right? So that I know this is kind of like a little bit the standard you want to have for a clinical questionnaire or something like this. But I think it's a first step, and if you would have a validation process, it would be quite a substantial process to complete that before you could go get started, right? So it is a limitation, yes.
It'd be certainly fascinating, but as Ahmed was reflecting, the gap between perception and reality, it struck me that wouldn't it be interesting not just to collect data from care providers who think they know maybe the lay of the land in terms of what's available, and then to, from the same jurisdiction, ask people who need the service, what is their perception of what's available, to measure that gap. I'd be interested to see that. Anyway, thank you.
Absolutely, and that's basically the reflection that Susanna was mentioning in terms of bringing those who are actually using the services in that process. And it might be interesting because, the system that we have developed right now for addiction is new in our field, but this is a methodology that people have been using in areas like politics and ecology and environment change. And they develop specific methodologies to, over the time, to validate the surveys and also make sure that when we have a responder, over the time they can even evaluate the quality of responses of that responder. So even they add specific components to the survey, they add specific vignettes in the surveys to just make sure that they increase the validity, and also they can check the responses of specific responders to the actual reality. And so there are specific methodologies to increase the quality, and we are getting there. So we had a specific workshop, and we invited experts from ecology, from politics, from many areas that they have never heard about addiction medicine as a discipline. and putting them together. And we learn a lot from in that process, but there are still many things to be done in that process. So I think that we are done. Okay, yeah. So yeah, we are passing. We can kind of continue the questions after the session. So we are just 1 minute kind of ahead of the timing of the schedule. We are going to have a keynote speaker right now. Who is the keynote right now? Okay, you are going to be the keynote speaker. So hopefully we are not going to eat your time. So Raju, we can just continue discussion afterwards. But thank you very much for joining us, and we are here to extend the interactions. Thank you very much.